So now that I have my drum track finished and ready for mixing for later, I can move on to the next instrument, which is bass, obviously. So the way I record bass is I usually go straight in as a DI signal and then add any processing after. So I try to get always, you get still pretty good sound with the eye for bass. So I plug that in, record with that, and then I can choose my amplifier up here or add any processing to it. So this is the performance. I'm just gonna show you just the DI signal of the bass without anything on it. So still a nice bass sound, what I like to do then, once I recorded my whole performance, is add an actual amp to it to make it sound even more realistic, The one I like to use most is called Bias Amp from a company called Positive Grid. Really great plugin. And I also use a lot of guitar amps out of this. They sound really good and realistic. So I'm gonna show you just what model I chose for that. By the way, I also use this plugin for my guitars in this track. Okay, so yeah, so that's the model I chose. There are a lot of models to choose from, to be honest, but this one sounded quite good to me, quite realistic. So here it is with just with the amp. Without. So it adds more kind of meat to it, it's more realistic, a little bit more drive as well. Then what I do, if I want to fine tweak the sound a bit more, I can do it on here, add bass, middle, treble, what I want. But also what's really important is this cab feature. So I can go on here and actually move the mic around the cone, like if you were recording in a proper studio, you would have this a setup like this and then try to find the sweet spot by moving the mic around. So really it does make quite a lot of difference. Usually the closer you are to the cone, the more treble you're gonna have, and if you move further away, you have more bass, more low end in there. Yeah, in this plugin I can also choose the type of preamp that I want. So if I want more saturation, more low, mid, all that sort of stuff. Power amp. And so on. Yeah, so like I have a noise gate feature as well. Reverb, obviously I don't need that for bass. Output volume, and that's basically it. Quite simple to use, but really good sounding, I think. Alright guys, so we're moving on to guitars now. Now, being a guitarist myself, I'm usually very picky about the sound that I want, especially if I have to work for a client. They usually have a very specific sound in mind that they want. And this client, the client in question, he told me specifically, I'm looking for a punk rock sound, a sound that is close. He mentioned the band Rise Against to me, which I haven't heard before, to be honest, but he said, I'm looking for that type of sound, very punk, rock sounding, very, distorted, but he has to sit well in the mix at the same time. So so my job was to come up with a sound that was as close as possible to what he wanted. Again, I decided to use the same plugin I was using for bass, which is called pt.2. And just before moving on, you can see here that I grouped my rhythm guitars in what is called a summing stack here. So this allows me not only to be to make it look more tidy, you know, in my workstation, but also I could apply, if I want, further processing to this track, which includes all my rhythm guitars. So again, I have more options this way. And I've done the same with drums, as you can see. Okay, so let's dive into the rhythm guitars. So let's open Bias Amp 2. And there is a really cool feature here in Bias Amp again, which is called Amp Match, right here. What Amp Match is basically is it allows you to drop in a guitar track or a particular song, and it finds within the plugin all the possible guitar sounds that can match that particular track. So let's say I want a sound that's close to, I don't know, Guns N' Roses. So I choose a Guns N' Roses track, drop it in, and the plugin finds all the possible sounds that are really close to that particular guitar sound. Really cool feature, you know. So what I did, I took a Rise Against track, dropped it in here, and what basically I came up with these two types of sounds right here. So I call this one Rise Against Tone 1 and Rise Against Tone 2. Now, in the end, I did not choose to use both sounds at the same time because I thought it would sound a bit too harsh, a bit too trebly sounding. So what I did, I combined two different types of sounds, really totally different, you know, which if you hear them by themselves, you think they won't sound too good, but when you hear them together, it all suddenly makes more sense that way. So I'm just gonna show you the two sounds I came up with. So the first one, which I applied on the left guitar, sounds like this. Yeah, so a lot of mids there. Sounds a bit muddy by itself. And that's the amp. I chose this Monster VH4 amp. The right guitar, on the other hand, sounds like this. Right, so completely different sound from what you heard before. There's a lot of treble there. It's very a lot of top end. Now if I put them both together, check this out. Sounds pretty cool, right? So that means, you know, I took two different complete sounds, put them together, and they together they sound good, as opposed to just choosing one guitar sound and, you know, putting it on both sides, which might not sound as good, you know, if you know what I mean. So that's the sound I chose. For the right guitar track, that's the amp I used. Again, within Bias Amp 2. Right, so I chose the Rise Against Sound 2 in the end, together with the Monster VH4. All right, so that's the rhythm guitar track. Again, you see you can see there's two further tracks here, but I chose the same sounds for those. And the overdubs, on the other hand, have a totally different type of sound, and I chose a different plugin as well. This is the PRS plugin by Waves, really great sounding plugin. It's a more like modern sounding tone. There's a few options on here, but that's what I chose for the overdubs. So it's quite a lot of mids in there, and I chose that on purpose because I wanted it to stand out really. You know, I wanted to hear that sort of melody on top of the rhythm guitars. Now let's listen to both the overdubs and the rhythm guitars together. So I'm just gonna solo the rhythm guitars and the overdubs so you'll hear what I mean. So you can still hear those overdubs really clearly, you know, even if they are on top of the guitars, which probably wouldn't have happened if I chose the same sound for everything, you know. So I like to give it a bit of variety, you know, I like to experiment with my guitar sounds. Yeah, so that's basically it. And then any additional tracks that I put there are the intro guitar track, which I chose to apply a very cool effect, which I'll explain to you better in the mixing process. But this effect sounds like that. So. Yeah, so it's kind of a lo-fi effect, really cool, you know, something that I like to do once in a while. And then the intro break guitars here, which is basically I played the same part that I played on the intro, but without that effect. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's basically it for the guitars, and then everything else I applied it afterwards in the mixing process.